Now, every morning in kitchens across the world, millions of people pour themselves a bowl of cornflakes. It's the most harmless food on the planet. No sugar, no fat, no personality. It just sits there in the milk, soggy and beige, asking nothing of you. You'd never guess that the man behind it slept in a separate bedroom from his wife for 40 years, adopted more than 40 children, so he'd never have to touch her, kept a chimpanzee as a breakfast companion, and once recommended sewing a child's foreskin shut with silver wire. We like to imagine the great inventors of history as a clean, rational man in the lab, codes quietly discovering truth through scientific methods. But John Harvey Kellogg wasn't chasing truth, he was chasing purity, an obsession so absolute that it curdled into something much stronger. He didn't just want to feed America, he wanted to switch America off. Welcome to the Purity Void. Grab a bowl, hold the milk, and let's talk about the doctor who tried to boil the sex drive out of an entire nation using breakfast. To understand John Harvey Kellogg, you first have to understand the world he was born into. A world where medicine was still half superstition and human body was treated like a haunted house nobody fully trusted. Born in 1852 to a devout Seventh-day Adventist family in Michigan, Kellogg grew up steeped in a religious movement obsessed with biologic living. The idea that physical purity and spiritual purity were the same substance, just wearing different clothes. Sin didn't just live in the soul, sin lived in your stomach, your bowels, and apparently your nervous system, just waiting for the wrong sandwich to send it off. At 24 years old, Kellogg took control of a small Adventist health retreat in Battle Creek and rebuilt it in his own image. He renamed it the Battle Creek Sanitarium, or as everyone affectionately called it, the SAN. And in the era where the average American lived to about 41, city streets doubled as open sewers and half of the medicine still involved leeches, the SAN genuinely looked like the future. Within a decade, the SAN exploded from 300 patients a year to nearly 1,200. It grew into a sprawling 30-acre campus that looked less like a hospital and more like a 5-star hotel with a god complex. The guest list reads like a fever dream: Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, Amelia Earhart, 2 future presidents, and at one point Tarzan himself, the actor Johnny Weissmuller. They came for exercise machines, they came for the electrified pools, they came to be blasted with high-pressure water hoses in places most modern spas wouldn't dare advertise. And they came above all to be told by a 5'4" man dressed entirely in white exactly what was wrong with their bowels. Because Kellogg believed, with a total conviction of a man who has never once been told he might be wrong, that almost every disease known to humanity originated in the intestines. Constipation wasn't just uncomfortable. To Kellogg, it was a slow-motion poison. A toxic sludge rotting inside you and corrupting your entire body from the inside out. His solution was total aggressive bowel management, enemas, laxative, fiber-heavy diets, and a fanatical devotion to what he called regularity. It's genuinely difficult to overstate how much of Kellogg's medical philosophy came down to one core belief: if it comes out of you clean, you'll be better as a person. He built an entire empire. A hospital, a research lab, a magazine, a food company, on the foundation of a man who was quite literally obsessed with poop. And it's here in his fixation on internal cleanliness that the story starts sliding from eccentric health nut into something far darker. Now, if constipation was the enemy of the body, masturbation, in Kellogg's mind, was the enemy of civilization itself. Kellogg didn't just disapprove of masturbation, he treated it like a public health emergency, on the scale of a plague. In his 1879 book, Plain Facts for Old and Young, he described the act in language that reads less like medical and more like a scripture, calling it one of the most degrading acts a person could commit. He claimed to have identified 39 distinct warning signs of the solitary vice in young people, including, and I promise I'm not making this up, a love of solitude, unnatural boldness, paleness, and a taste for chewing on chalk. Basically, if your teenager was quite pale or weird at dinner, Kellogg had diagnosis ready to go. And his cure? Bland food. Kellogg genuinely believed that spicy, rich, stimulating food fed sexual desire. The meat and seasoning quite literally lit a fire in the body that eventually burned its way down to the groin. So his solution was to invent food so flavorless, so aggressively unstimulating that it would starve the libido into submission. Cornflakes wasn't a breakfast innovation, they were a chastity device you could pour milk on. He wasn't alone in this. The anti-masturbation movement had other true believers like Sylvester Graham, whose bland cracker crusade eventually gave us the graham cracker. But Kellogg took it further than almost anyone. Beyond that, he documented and in some of his writings seemed to endorse brutal physical interventions for children caught in the act. Circumcision without anesthetics as punishment for boys, cages and restraints to prevent nighttime contact, and for girls, the application of carbolic acid to clitoris to numb sensation entirely. Sit with that for a second. A man whose face is on cereal boxes in grocery stores today was at the same time prescribing chemical mutilation for children in the name of moral hygiene. The truly grim irony is that Kellogg wasn't a fringe lunatic screaming from the street's corner. He was one of the most respected physicians in America. Presidents took his advice, titans of industry funded his research. This wasn't quackery hiding in shadows. It was quackery with a 5-star hotel, a medical degree, and a standing ovation. Now let's talk about the sanitarium itself, because if you think the food was strange, wait until you hear about the equipment. Kellogg was obsessed with mechanized wellness, turning the human body into something you could tune up like an engine. He invented a mechanical horse for indoor exercises, essentially a vibrating wooden saddle that jostled patients up and down to simulate horseback riding because apparently actual horses were too inefficient for the sans tight schedule of purification. He built electric belts that delivered mild shocks to tone muscles. He had massive hydrotherapy tanks that altered scalding and freezing water on patients because nothing says wellness retreat like thermal shock therapy. He had light bath cabinets that baked people under artificial sunlight while their heads stuck out the top like very solemn Jack-in-the-Box. And yes, the yogurt enemas were real. Kellogg believed that introducing beneficial bacteria directly into the colon, sometimes orally and rectally simultaneously because why choose, would recalibrate the gut and by extension the soul. And then there's the chimpanzee. Kellogg kept a pet chimp that he would bring on stage during his lectures, essentially as a visual aid. In one of the signature bits, he would toss a piece of steak to the chimp, who would fling it right back in apparent disgust. Then he'd toss a banana, and the chimp would happily eat it. Kellogg would turn to the crowd, hundreds of wealthy, sick Americans who paid good money to be lectured at by a man in a white suit, and declare that even a dumb animal knew better than to eat meat. It is an absurd image. A world-renowned physician took a vaudeville bit with a monkey to convince millionaires to become vegetarians. But it worked. People believed him. People still believe versions of this stuff today, dressed up in slightly more modern packaging. Now, here's where the story gets personal and honestly kind of heartbreaking underneath all the absurdity. Kellogg married Ella Eaton in 1879. By most accounts, the marriage was never physically consummated, not once, not ever. Some sources claim he spent part of his own honeymoon writing one of his anti-sex books, which is either the least romantic thing imaginable or exactly what you'd expect from a man who considered intimacy a disease factor. He and Ella slept in separate bedrooms for the rest of their lives, and yet somehow their household was never empty. Over the course of their marriage, the Kelloggs fostered more than 40 children, formally adopting several of them. It's a strange contradiction, sitting right at the center of the man. Someone so terrified of physical intimacy that he refused to touch his own life, but who still built in his own strange way one of the largest blended families in American history. Was it compassion? Was it a way to have a family without confronting his own aversions? Kellogg never really explained it, and honestly, we're probably not equipped to psychoanalyze a man who's been dead for 80 years. But it's one part of his biography that resists the easy joke. Everything else about the man practically writes its own punchline. This part just sits there, complicated and a little sad. Now every good empire needs a betrayal, and Kellogg's came from inside his own house. His younger brother, Will Keith Kellogg, worked as his business manager at the Sun for decades, largely in his shadow. It was Will, working alongside John in the sanitarium kitchen, who helped perfect the flaking process and that turned boiled wheat and corn into crispy, shelf-stable cereal. But the brothers disagreed on the one ingredient that mattered most to Will's business instinct: sugar. John refused to add it. To him, sugar was just another stimulant, another crack in the wall of purity he'd spent his life building. Will, on the other hand, understood something John never could, that people don't want to eat punishment for breakfast. They want it to taste good. So Will broke away, started his own company, added the sugar, and built what would essentially become the Kellogg Company, the global cereal empire whose mascot is a rooster, not a monkey. The brothers spent years locked in a bitter legal battles over the family name, fighting in court over who actually had the right to put Kellogg on a cereal box. William eventually won, securing the rights to the own surname in 1920s. A genuinely wild sentence to have to type, that a man had to sue his brother for the right to use his own last name. They never really reconciled. On his deathbed decades later, John Harvey wrote his brother a 7-page letter of apology. His secretary, for reasons never fully explained, chose not to deliver it. The two men who built one of the most recognizable food brands on earth together died without even making peace. Over sugar, of all things. Now we have to talk about the part of this story that isn't funny at all. Kellogg wasn't just eccentric. He was, by any modern standard, a committed racist. He served as a leading figure in America's eugenics movement, hosting national conferences on race betterment and pushing the idea that certain groups of people were biologically and morally superior to others. His obsession with purity wasn't confined to bowels and bedrooms. It extended into genuinely dangerous ideology about who deserved to exist and reproduce, dressed up in the same scientific-sounding language he used to sell cornflakes. It's an uncomfortable footnote that a lot of retellings conveniently leave out, because it doesn't fit a whimsical, wacky serial inventor narrative. But it belongs here, because it is the same brain running the same operating system. A mind this fixated on control, purity, and moral failure of the human body was never going to stop at breakfast, to his credit, and it is a strange, contradictory credit. The sanitarium itself was desegregated, and Kellogg trained black doctors and nurses on staff at a time when that was deeply unusual. The man is not a simple villain. He is genuinely contradictory historical figure capable of real institutional progress in one direction while championing something monstrous in the other. History rarely hands you a clean story, and Kellogg is about as messy as it gets. Now, here's the thing about John Harvey Kellogg. Every morning somewhere in the world, a kid pours a bowl of cereal that traces its DNA directly back to a man obsessed with silencing the human body. The product survived, the ideology mostly didn't. Sugar won, pleasure won. The bland little flake built to suppress desire is now sold specifically because it tastes good. Maybe that's the real punchline here. You can build an empire on belief that the human body is dangerous and needs to be controlled, and the market will simply root around you, add sugar and sell the thing back to the world as a treat. Kellogg spent 62 years trying to engineer humanity into something quieter, cleaner, less alive. And all he actually managed to invent was a really good snack. Next time you're eating a bowl of cereal, take a second to appreciate the absurd, uncomfortable, genuinely disturbing history behind the milk. Wellness culture has always had a dark side. It just used to come with a chimpanzee. Stay strange, stay sharp, and maybe don't look too closely at what's in your pantry. See ya.